Hey, welcome to a special edition of the Scott Hamilton Show. Massive storm about to hit the South, East Coast. Ice, snow, sleet, rain, you name it. There's going to be a ton of weather all up and down the eastern seaboard and inland, way inland, bitter cold temperatures, all this, that, and the other. So everybody stay safe, okay? Been some changes with some sporting events. Basketball schedules have changed a little bit. I know the Kentucky Ole Miss game has been moved up to 11 a.m. Eastern time to accommodate that. So adjust your viewing schedules accordingly. Big news is the saga that's been going on at Clemson. And we've touched on it here quite a bit over the last week or so when it really first sprang out last Friday, the last day of the transfer portal. Luke Ferrelli, the linebacker from Cal, ACC Rookie of the Year, officially entered the portal again Thursday. He had committed to Clemson and showed up on campus, was practicing, going to school, doing this, that, or the other, and then re-entered the portal. And apparently there were some things that weren't above board. And Dabo Swinney and athletic director Graham Neff spoke out on it. And man, it's something. I mean, it's apparently they are making some really serious allegations, and they say they have documentation to back everything up that Ole Miss had tampered with Luke Ferrelli after he arrived on campus. Either way, he's gone now. He's gone to Ole Miss. And Dabo and Graham Neff speaking out today. And I'm going to play a clip. They spoke for over an hour, by the way. And also new offensive coordinator Chad Morris was there. But it was all about this. And we knew it was about this. And we saw the email come earlier in the week that they would discuss some big picture roster items. And we were like, yeah, we know what that means. It's over this. It's over this. I've never seen Dabo quite as animated, maybe. I don't know if that's the correct word. Confident. He's confident. I mean, he's been a critic of this system basically since its inception, since its birth, when the transfer portal became a thing. And he's been so reluctant to use it, instead insisting on being a developmental program. And of course, it didn't work out this past season. This was supposed to have been the season that validated being a homegrown system, being a developmental program, and it didn't work out. And he's reluctantly given in and has been using the transfer portal more and more over the last few years. Baby steps. But then something like this happens. And I just have to think that this is going to set back any initiatives they have going forward with regards to building a roster based heavily on portal. Any chance that was ever going to happen has now gone the way of the dodo bird. And I'm going to play part of what Dabo said here in a moment. I think it's very important to note that this was a very interesting conversation, and it wasn't just about throwing grenades at Pete Golding, the new head coach at Ole Miss, at Luke Ferrelli's agent, or even Luke Ferrelli or any of that. I felt it was a very well-rounded conversation that not only outlined what happened, outlined that it's part of a systemic issue, and then threw out some ideas, some concepts on how to improve things. And it wasn't just Dabo, Graham Neff as well. And he had some words that really resonated with me later in their talk, where he said that Clemson, as much as anybody, is part of the problem. And they were showing some self-awareness with regards to that. And we'll touch on that in a few moments. We've got Chapel Fowler, outstanding reporter for the state newspaper in Columbia. He covers Clemson. He was there. I want to get his take on what happened, get his take on everything that was said by Dabo, by athletic director Graham Neff, and really get his assessment of what this means for Clemson going forward. But right now, I'm going to play this clip from Dabo. This is a little bit of Dabo, and it's laying out what happened. It sets forth a timeline, how Clemson reacted, what it did, and where things stand now. So it's a really interesting take.
That signed with Clemson, moved to Clemson, went to class, trained, and now he's no longer at Clemson. So I know y'all have heard a lot about that. My objective today is to just provide a little bit of clarity, a little bit of context as to what happened with this situation. So first of all, we did everything right. Kid goes in the portal. We reach out. He's interested, comes and visits Clemson, says this is where he wants to go, and we sign him. He moves to Clemson, again, rents an apartment, buys a car, goes to class for a week, trains, team meeting, position meetings, writes out his goals for the semester, like full-blown, like, let's Clemson student, like we're rolling. And so, and then all of a sudden, not here anymore. So how did we get here? Well, Sunday, January the 4th, Jordan Sorrells had his first conversation with Ryan Williams, the agent. And on Monday, January the 5th at 8:30, Luke Ferrelli, he showed up here at Clemson with his dad for his official visit. And they came over to my house a little after 9 or so that night. Okay. So I had a chance to meet with them for the very first time. And, it was just to get to know each other right there at the beginning. And, had a good conversation. My first question was, hey, they had just come in off of Ole Miss visit. I said, how was the visit? And his dad said, not good. Said it was a mess. It was unorganized. It was chaos. The building was a mess. Nobody knew what was going on. And I was like, well, look forward to y'all seeing Clemson tomorrow. We're going to be organized and structured. And so just kind of had some chit chat that night. And then tomorrow, the next day on Tuesday, January the 6th, he had his visit on campus at 2:30. Ryan Williams, the agent, Luke, the player, and his dad, they verbally accepted the terms of the offer, and they made a commitment to Clemson. Everybody high-fived it. Everybody's excited. We got our linebacker. We were going to take one linebacker. We're going to take one. So we got our linebacker. We canceled all the visits of all the other guys that we were going to schedule to come in throughout the rest of the week because we're done. We're taking one. We've made our commitment. He signed. All right. So, or the next day, Wednesday, that was 2:30 at 3:15. Luke and his dad left town to go back to California. Then Wednesday, January 7th at 11 a.m., Luke signed his financial aid agreement with Clemson. And then Sunday, January the 11th, he moved to Clemson. Again, rents an apartment, buys a car, goes to class for a week. He's in training for a week, team meeting, position meeting, all that. All right. And then on Wednesday, January 14th at 9:49 p.m., the agent, Ryan Williams, calls Jordan Sorrells. And during that conversation, Ryan conveys that Ole Miss has been coming hard after Luke. Sorrells confirmed, he went with the agent. He said, are you talking about the same Luke that's been enrolled at Clemson, that's been in class, that's moved here, that's signed with Clemson? And the agent assured him, yes, the same one. But he also assured Jordan Sorrells that Luke had no intention of leaving Clemson, but just thought y'all should be in the loop and check up on him tomorrow. So Thursday, January 15th at 11:45 a.m., just this past Thursday, Jordan came to me, and he told me about the conversation that he had the night before with the agent at 9:49. And so I directed Sorrells, hey, I don't know. I said, who's their GM? He said his name is Austin Thomas. I said, will you reach out to their GM? He said he knows him. And I said, listen, this guy has been a head coach for 4 weeks. I said, you reach out to the GM. I'm going to give him some grace. And you let him know that we know what's going on. All right. And if he doesn't cease communication, I'm going to turn him in. And so I really thought that would be the end of it. But it wasn't. So after that was 11:45. At 12:10, Jordan communicated to Austin Thomas via text because he was unable to reach him on the phone. And just a few minutes later at 12:14, they both connected on the phone. The Ole Miss GM, Austin Thomas, and Jordan reiterated our stance one more time. The GM assured Jordan that he had communicated to the agent that he wanted no part of this and that his relationship with Jordan was more important to him than Luke Ferrelli. But that Pete Golding just does what he does, quote, unquote. So at 1:30, Sorrells met with Luke face-to-face in his office. And Luke communicated to Jordan and to Ben Boulware that Pete texted him on Wednesday morning, the head coach at Ole Miss, when he was in his 8 a.m. class. And he said, the text message said, "I know you're signed. What's the buyout?" And he also, Luke said that Coach Golding also texted him a picture of a $1 million contract. Luke also mentioned to Jordan and to Ben that Coach Golding had Trinidad Chambliss call him from his phone, and that Coach Golding was there continuing to talk on his phone to push him to re-enter the transfer portal. He also said that Jackson Dart had reached out and called him. But Luke again assured Jordan that he had no intention of leaving. And Jordan kept me in the loop and told me the same thing. So we had a staff meeting on Friday morning, January the 16th, the last day of the portal. At 11:20, Luke called Ben Boulware and told him that Mississippi had reached out again, even though I had kind of let them know the day before, had reached out again, and they had not only reached out, but they had upped and doubled their offer. But Luke told Ben, hey, we're good. And so Ben told Luke to come to the office and see Sorrells and Coach Swinney and let them know, hey, everything is okay. So when that was over, Ben then texted Jordan Sorrells, and he let him know that Ole Miss had raised its offer to 2 years, $2 million. And again, that he had told Luke to come over and see us and let us know that everything is good. So at 11:57, so 11:20, Luke called Ben. 11:22, he texted Jordan this. At 11:57, Sorrells spoke with the agent Ryan Williams about the situation once again. The agent confirmed that head coach Pete Golding had continued to communicate with Luke and had raised the offer once again. Jordan asked to have Luke to give us the text messages that he had received from Coach Golding, but the agent was hesitant to do that because he didn't want to burn any bridges with Ole Miss, as you never know what will happen down the road. However, the agent communicated that if we were to add a second year at $1 million to the already agreed upon deal with Luke, then they would gladly give us whatever we need in order to turn Ole Miss in. Which Jordan appropriately said, no, we're not doing that. He also communicated that Ole Miss Assistant Director of Player Personnel, I guess it's J-A-I, C-H-O-U-D-A-R-Y, Shortery, I'm not sure. But the Assistant Director of Player Personnel was pushing to set up a Zoom call with them to discuss the details of their contract offer. So that was at 11:57, talking to the agent. At 12:30, Sorrells met Luke out in the parking lot outside our football facility, and Luke communicated that he was coming to assure him and Coach Swinney that he wasn't going anywhere. I was not in the building. Jordan called me to let me know what Luke said and for me to reach out to him. I called Luke and didn't get an answer. I'm back at work. I'm in my office. Everything's good. 4:14, Jordan Sorrells comes to see me. He had gotten a call from compliance telling him that Luke is in our compliance office trying to request to re-enter the transfer portal. So Jordan let me know. He let Tom Allen know. Called Luke, no answer. At 4:19, Jordan called the agent Ryan Williams again to alert him that Luke had requested to enter the portal. He responded via text to let him know that he was flying. Sorrells texted, Luke just reached out to our compliance and requested to go in the portal. What the heck is going on? The agent's response was, oh, bleep. Let me try and find out. At 4:40, Sorrells and Coach Allen arrived at Luke's apartment. Luke was in the driveway when they got there. His immediate response was, "I'm going to Ole Miss." Coach Allen and Jordan spent some time talking to him, and when they departed, he just said, "Hey, I need to clear my head." At 5:39, Jordan spoke with the Ole Miss GM, Austin Thomas, again to let him know that we knew all that was going on and that we were going to pursue all options to hold them accountable for tampering. And then at 7:20, after a phone call with Tom Allen and Ben Boulware, Luke affirmed his plan to enter the transfer portal. And then he called me and told me the same thing. Once I got word of all this at 4:15 that he was going over there trying to go in the portal, I immediately called our AD, Graham Neff. I also called Commissioner Phillips. He also called the SEC commissioner and others. So, this is obviously a crazy time. We turned everything in to the NCAA. And I'm just going to say this. This is like there's tampering and then there's blatant tampering. Tampering 101 is when you're talking to kids who aren't in the portal. Tampering 201 is when you've already negotiated the deal with the kids not in the portal. Tampering 301 is when you got a kid who's gone in the portal, signed somewhere, moved there, gone to classes, and you're texting them while they're in class. That's like a whole nother level of tampering. And it's total hypocrisy because all this is going on while they, on the other side, are trying to fight their defensive end from going in the portal. They have accused publicly others of tampering with their roster and their players while they are over here tampering. All right, so this is just a really sad state of affairs, and it's, to me, we have a broken system. And if there are no consequences for tampering, then we have no rules and we have no governance. It's really just that simple, okay? This is not, let me be very clear. This is not about a linebacker at Clemson. I don't, listen, I feel sorry for I think it's a symptom of a system that you have a kid that I meet at 9:30 and he's, signing the next, like I feel sorry for the young man, to be honest with you. I blame the adults. And again, if you want to have adult world, then there needs to be adult consequences. Okay? So, but this is not about a linebacker at Clemson. And I don't want anyone on our team that doesn't want to be here. I would never want that. All right? But let me tell you what it is about. It's about the next kid. And it's about the next kid. And it's about the message that is being sent if this blatant tampering is allowed to happen without any consequences. This is about protecting our program. This is about college football. That's what this is about. I stay in my lane most of the time. I've seen a lot of things in my days, and I'm like, hey, man, you just do whatever you're going to do. But here's what I'm going to do. I've always just kind of stayed in my lane and handled my business. But and I've stayed focused on Clemson. But I am not going to let someone just flat out tamper with my program. If you tamper with my players, I'm going to turn you in. It's just that simple. And again, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe maybe this isn't tampering. I don't know. Maybe I just need to get some clarification on what tampering is. But I understood tampering to be if someone is signed and in classes and not in the portal, because he's not in the portal, he had to re-enter the portal, then that's the definition of tampering. So if it's not, then my apologies. But that's what I see as tampering. So there's a lot more I could say, but I'm going to let the NCAA handle this, and I'm going to let them do their job. And I'll say this shouldn't be a 3-year or a 3-month investigation. This might take 3 days. They're either going to tell the truth or they're going to lie. It's one of the two. But you ain't got to go. All you got to do is get the phone. This is not complicated. This is very simple. And let me make this clear, too. I'm not out to get anybody fired. That's not my objective in this. I'm not out to get anybody fired, but there has to be accountability and consequences for this type of behavior and total disregard for the rules.
And sure is a lot to unpack there. I mean, Dabo, he was convicted. His conviction, he had some conviction there, even more than normal. So good on him. It's just so much to unpack, and I have so many questions. I took a lot of notes while Dabo was talking, and I'll address those with our guest Chapel Fowler of the state newspaper in Columbia when he joins us in a moment, and later on in the program. But still, I am shocked by this, how all this has transpired, and not necessarily that it happened, but just how it continues to develop. I find it really, really surprising because it's rare. It's rare when another coach will call out another coach and accuse them of tampering, because it only takes one person to hit a big button and everybody gets implicated all over the place. And I'm guessing Dabo feels comfortable enough with how they operate and the things that they do that he's not concerned about that he's ready to defend his program and defend his program. I'm just stunned. We're trying to unpack it all with Chapel Fowler of the state newspaper. He's going to come aboard in a minute. I'm going to ask him his reaction to everything Dabo said. What does it mean going forward? And will it bring about some changes? Chapel Fowler on the other side. Stick around.
Sports fans, it's time to gear up. Head to fanstreamsports.com and check out our brand new merchandise store. We're talking bold t-shirts, 3/4 zips, hoodies, hats, mugs, and more. Everything you need to rep your favorite shows and your favorite crew. Whether you're rolling with the J.P. Peterson Show in Tampa Bay, From the Rough in Dallas, the Tim May Show featuring Clay Hall, or the Jeff Thidoff Show in Ohio, or any of our Fanstream Sports original programming, we've got the perfect look for game day and every day. So don't wait. fanstreamsports.com. Click merch and grab your gear now. Wear the stream, live the stream, fanstreamsports.com.
Welcome back. And again, just a really dynamic might not be the correct word. Explosive might be extreme, but it could also apply to what happened at Clemson today. I mean, just allegations and Dabo being Dabo, but really having receipts to everything that they say happened. And man, I want to know what to make of all this. I want to know what's it mean going forward and how this could change things for the better, hopefully. For the better, we're going to ask a guy, he had boots on the ground. It's our friend Chapel Fowler from the state newspaper in Columbia. And Chapel, before we get going, I have just one very, very broad question. How the heck did you react when they started just unloading today? Because that's very un-Clemson-like to come forward. And it's unlike any school, really, to come forward and just make straight-up allegations against another coach.
Yeah. Obviously, I think everybody who showed up at that presser, Scott, knew that they were going to touch on this Luke Ferrelli situation. That was very obvious, just given what had happened since Friday and even the framing of the media advisory where it was said in a very – maybe the understatement of the year early so far in 26 that Dabo Swinney and Graham Neff would touch on, quote, other big picture topics related to roster management. I think what was the phrasing in the email. So obviously I went into it knowing that they were going to raise a stink about this, but to what level I had no idea. And I think when I heard him just using names, first and last names, no dancing around it, he mentions the Ole Miss agent's name. And the Ole Miss general manager's name, the player's agent's name, and even Luke Ferrelli himself. That there's no dancing around. This player. He used Luke Ferrelli's name. That's very rare for Dabo. From having covered him, whether he's or especially if he's kind of talking bad about something or a situation, he usually doesn't like to drag players into it. And that wasn't his intent here. Like he said, he didn't have any beef with the players specifically, and it was more a system-wide critique. But when I heard those names start to pile up, and then you hear some specific timestamps, 4:47 p.m., I'm like, okay, I think this list of notes and this page is long, by the way, that he's reading off, that there's going to be some specifics in here, and they definitely delivered on that part, to say the least.
Well, I have a question, and nobody's broached this, or at least I've not seen anybody broach it. I threw it out there on Twitter/X. Okay, Ferrelli told them that Ole Miss was contacting him. I mean, even pointing out that he was in an 8:00 class good on him, first of all, for having an 8 o'clock class. But he told them that. He showed them text messages. I believe there was a Pete Golding picture of a $1 million contract or something. He shared all this with Clemson, and yet Ferrelli, he rats out Ole Miss, and yet he still goes to Ole Miss. Is he a bad negotiator, maybe trying to get a better deal from Clemson and like endearing himself by sharing this? Or B, is he just not real bright? I mean, I don't expect you to go down these roads with these names, but it made no sense to me. How can you feel comfortable about going to an environment after throwing them under the bus like he did? I'm baffled. Have you thought about that?
A little bit. Now that you say it, it kind of stands out even more. I mean, literally, and the timestamps back this up, at least from what, now we didn't get any documents. I will say this is Dabo reading off stuff, but I tend to think if you're going to raise a stink like this publicly, you feel pretty good about your information. And it was very detailed and kind of lined up with how stuff had been reported by a few outlets. But to go from, I think it was like Wednesday midday or maybe late afternoon, where again, Luke Ferrelli is kind of like, look at this. Like, this is crazy. What do you guys think about this? This is so wild. Look at Pete Golding still coming after me. To go from that and joking about it, showing it to your position coach, to the school's general manager, who's very involved, Jordan Sorrells is, and that sort of contract stuff and roster management stuff, to go from that, essentially laughing, at these offers to, Friday, 4 p.m. or whatever, they can't get a hold of him. They roll up to his apartment driveway and he meets him in the driveway and says, hey, I'm going to Ole Miss. It's such a contrast. I mean, I think if I were to just look at it, I haven't talked to Luke Ferrelli or anything. And I think Dabo hit on this point later in that presser too. These are young kids. And we know the contract specifics, even in this case. Ole Miss offered Luke Ferrelli a 1-year, $1 million contract. Obviously, that would indicate that Clemson, whatever they were paying him, it wasn't $1 million because they are, they're trying to get above that already. And that becomes 2 years, $2 million. And I mean, I can understand. I mean, if you're 17, 8 years old, now he's older, he's probably 18 or 19 or 20, but you're presented with that level of money and then suddenly it doubles. And there's really nothing stopping you from going after it if you want to. I mean, you probably, if you're in his shoes, you've seen everything that's happened where this is very much like a free agency market and there's not really any enforcement. And I can see how a kid who probably really has never been presented with that level of money before. And I mean, I'm sure it's really impactful for his family and the people he loves to be put in that spot. I think you could go from joking really quickly to saying, oh, like this is actually a lot better. This is a lot different. I need to consider this. And that obviously puts the kid in a tough spot. He could have said no, yes, but I think he's not exactly one of the losers in this situation because he's making all that money and he made the decision and he knew the blowback that was going to come with that. But it's putting kids like him over and over and over in those tough situations. And it's just leading to burn bridges and madness and pressers like today's, which are good for us in media, but maybe not for everybody else involved in college sports and I guess any capacity.
I'm still floored by it. And, you bring up a really interesting point. Isn't that what his agent is for? Shouldn't his agent have been giving him some kind of guidance or counseling? Hey, they're offering this, but this could backfire on you. This might not work out. You're handling this wrong. So shame on his agent. Shame on Luke Ferrelli for probably not communicating everything to his agent. That's a real possibility. And we did get that $1 million number, and that was huge. That was huge because you know how schools are trying to keep these things under wrap for myriad reasons. One, they don't want other schools to find out, but two, they don't want their own teammates to find out. That fractures locker rooms. But did you get any sense of what the buyout actually is? Because that's something that Pete Golding, and correct me if I'm wrong, Chapel, literally asked in one of his text messages, what's the buyout? Do we have any idea what that was?
Yeah, so that is something that's from Dabo's notes that he shared with us, that one of the texts sent from Pete Golding, coach of Ole Miss, to Luke Ferrelli during this 8 a.m. class on last Wednesday, would have been 2 days before he told Clemson, hey, I'm going to re-enter the portal, was I know you're signed. What's the buyout? Another part of that Clemson didn't really hit on, and if you're just looking at it from a purely objective view like we are, maybe that's where Clemson maybe slipped up or had some bad business or maybe would have in hindsight liked to do things differently because they were very specific, Dabo was, in kind of recounting all this to say that I think Ferrelli, the phrase he used was he had verbally agreed to a deal. And obviously that's referring to a revenue sharing deal. That's not referring to the financial aid agreement that he signed, that all transfers signed in a very basic like scholarship capacity. They had a verbal agreement on a deal for a certain amount of money. I understand that it's kind of, sometimes those deals are not signed in the moment because there's a lot of kind of contractual things with bonuses or NFL style things where, hey, if you get this many receiving yards, this many tackles, there's this much additional money. So, maybe it's a blank contract and you're verbally agreeing to this total, but all the little side stuff still has to get worked out. They did not have him signed to one of those though. So in terms of a buyout, specifically off like a revenue sharing contract, you've got nothing. Now that doesn't mean they couldn't pursue something else, but specifically for that mechanism you're referring to, Pete Golding is asking about a buyout. He's probably used to having to pay something like that. And he probably, I don't know if he figured out or if he learned somehow, some way that there wasn't really a buyout, that probably perked his ears up a little bit more. My objective view is Clemson should have gotten that signature immediately. I don't know why they didn't. Dabo didn't divulge those details. I understand why they wouldn't want to, but if you're looking at it from Clemson's side, what could they have done better in this obviously very wild situation? I think you point to that.
Wild's one way to put it. So we're talking $1 million just in the revenue sharing agreement from allowed via the House settlement. Do we have any sense of what his NIL obligations were to Clemson? Did he have any NIL obligations? Because, and I get a little confused on it, Chapel, because Clemson has brought everything in-house. Correct me if I'm wrong, with Clemson Ventures, basically all of its collectives funnel through that.
That's true. Right? Yeah. Everything's in-house now. Yeah.
So I'm wondering what those deals look like, what he walked away from with regards to that. This whole deal is just absolutely baffling. And it's more interesting because, and you and I talked about this off air a little bit, Dabo has been the most, and he's been chastised for it, for being the most vocal person against the current system, the pay for play and the player empowerment and all that. Not always in a negative way, but he's been very vocal about it, and he's been taken down the road pretty badly about it as well. This is every fear he had coming to life. Wouldn't you agree? And he was almost obligated, given how adamantly he's spoken out in the past, he was almost obligated to not only say that something bad happened, but that he had to name names, Chapel.
Yeah, he kind of said that himself, and it's kind of a privileged life to live. I think the phrase he used was, this is my first time really getting into the portal like this. There's a lot of Clemson fans that probably would like for this not to be his first time really digging into the portal. But I think he mentioned it a few times during the presser unprompted, just that week that they spent when they were getting commitments left and right. This was 2 weeks ago, first week of January, when they really signed the bulk of their class. It was it's going to be, I think, 9 guys, 10 if you include their JUCO guy. It was at 10 with Ferrelli. So a lot of portal work. Historically, they signed more guys in a week. They signed twice as many guys in a week than they did in the previous 7 years combined. They signed 5 over the first 7 years of the true portal era, and they signed 10 this month. So I think he left that experience, and especially the Ferrelli part, which was particularly, egregious if you're looking at it from Clemson's side, like really jarred about stuff. And again, it's a funny spot to be in. I'm sure at least one coach saw him say that and kind of rolled their eyes and was like, yeah, like, welcome to the real world, dude. This is what we've all been dealing with for 4, 5, 6 years. But when you're a coach that it has that level of job security, prominence, university support, and like his words matter, he knows that. He's very aware of where he stands in the game right now, especially with Saban retired. If you're going to talk about active coaches who can kind of really pull the most weight, it's probably him and Kirby, right? I'd probably put right up near the top. So I think he probably felt some level of obligation. It helps that I think most people looking at this case objectively would probably lean on Clemson's side or feel bad for Clemson as opposed to feeling bad for Ole Miss. So it is kind of a slam dunk. PR-wise, I think most people are going to read his comments. I'm sure he's getting a million texts right now from other coaches saying, thank you for saying that. But I do feel like just given how much he's pushed back against stuff, and tampering specifically too, he's ranted about many times. And now it's happened to you in a really direct way that you can prove, you kind of need to go for it. So the naming names had to happen. I agree. That it kind of loses its teeth if you don't do that. And so many people have done that without naming names. Credit to him for doing something different and putting putting those first and last out there.
Yeah, the closest we've gotten to naming names was really the whole Jimbo Saban flap at SEC meetings about 3 years ago. That was the closest we got. This is next level, and I'm still trying to wrap my mind around everything that happened. I mean, and to your point, they did go hard in the portal for Clemson. I think what did they have? 3 players last year, maybe 3 the year before, and one of them was Hunter Johnson, a guy who had already been to Clemson, so that kind of sort of didn't count.
5 total transfers before this cycle. 3 of them were last year, and before that, it was 2 third-string quarterbacks who never started a game: Hunter Johnson, like you mentioned, and Paul Tyson. So you can count.
Hunter Johnson had been to Clemson already.
Yeah, the boomerang portal guy. So really 3 true portal additions in 7 years, and then 10 in like 2 weeks.
And then this happens, and he touched on it. How they had with Chad Morris, they had made the decision not to go into the portal and get a quarterback. They were going to develop one of their old guy, one of their own guys, and that's the Clemson way. That's what they do. But to now have this happen, I'm so curious. I don't want to wish my life away, but I'm wondering what happens next year. I am. And Chapel, before I let you go, and I know you've been working very hard, excellent job on this story and every story. But I'm wondering this. It was such a wide-ranging press conference, not only for Dabo, but also athletic director Graham Neff. And what I found really interesting, I'll use that word, interesting, was that they not only threw out these allegations with receipts, but they also stepped up and offered solutions on how to fix a variety of problems, not just this one. So other than this specific instance, where they are naming names, where they're, implicating Pete Golding and Ole Miss for tampering with Luke Ferrelli, what was your biggest takeaway from this? Was it Dabo's idea for a calendar? Was it how strongly Graham Neff spoke up and said, we are also part of the problem, so we have to be part of the solution? What did you take away?
Yeah, I think you hit the 2 main ones. Briefly on Dabo with the calendar, we as media don't get a lot of relaxed, in a press conference time with him, but 2 times now in December and January. Once was on National Signing Day, and then at the AFCA Coaches Convention in Charlotte. He's just kind of spent some time chatting with the media in a down moment. And a lot of that stuff that he brought out with the calendar today was stuff that had been on his mind as long as a month ago. The specifics on when to do it so kids can still graduate in the spring, and how to have that cooling off period. I forget if he was a former real estate agent or insurance salesman at some point, with that line about that's why car insurance is more expensive for a 16-year-old than a 26-year-old. I've heard that one before from him. So a lot of this stuff I think has been kind of ruminating in his head. So it was interesting. He told us at AFCA that he had done a voice memo to himself at one point because it was just on his mind. And this was a week before the Ferrelli thing happened, that he just kind of sat down and was like, all right, I'm just going to talk this out so I have it somewhere in case I need it. Well, obviously now he has a reason to show it. So I thought that was interesting. I thought there was some decent ideas in there. I understand the calendar stuff, especially the timing of it is ridiculous in a lot of ways for just about everybody. Other stuff that he said, I don't know, maybe it happens, maybe it doesn't. All of it would take a lot to get done. And that kind of leads into the other point, which I think you said, Graham Neff saying, let's point the finger at ourselves. I appreciated that from him, because the first thing I think of when I think of this calendar thing, like we just mentioned, who voted for that calendar? The American Football Coaches Association unanimously recommended that calendar last year at their meeting. The coaches put this calendar in place, and now they're complaining about it. There are so many coaches, ADs, people on these committees that are complaining about stuff, and the rules that are in place, you kind of set up those rules. So I think Graham's a really smart guy, and I think that was a good self-aware moment, probably a little self-preservation too, to not, get a bunch of crap or hate comments saying, hey, you're the one who helped do this. But I thought that was really interesting from him, and I thought he was really intentional in doing that. And for them to kind of end the presser on not a high note, but saying, hey, we're not just here to complain about Ole Miss. We're here to offer solutions, even if those are far out and far-fetched and, aspirations and not really realistic things, or maybe if they only get 10% done. I did appreciate that they at least, after going scorched earth, offered something instead of just leaving after bringing out all the receipts, like you mentioned. So that was a refreshing way to end it. How much of it happens, though? Nah, I don't know.
Yeah, you're exactly right. The whole I think about the Charles Bediako thing going on at Alabama, and then even the player also Najee at Baylor, they will be allowed to play because of rules that the school presidents signed off on. That
Correct.
I mean, those are the rules. They're going by the rules, and the only way there's going to be changes if these guys unite and get together and say, we've got to change this. We've got to fix it. And unfortunately, it might literally take an act of Congress, and we have a whole lot of other stuff they need to be worrying about right now other than the transfer portal. Chapel Fowler, you are the man. You get a lot of good stuff done at the state, and I know you're going to stay on top of this story and all the rest, man. I really appreciate you. Absolutely.
Thanks for having me, Scott. It was a fun conversation.
All righty. It's Chapel Fowler of the state newspaper in Columbia. Again, just so much to unpack. And I mentioned the notes I had that I took when Dabo was talking. And my first question is, and I asked this of Chapel, how welcome Ferrelli is going to be at Ole Miss, because he threw them under the bus. He presumably, the way it sounds to me, is that he was willing to give up the receipts in order to get a better deal. How can you trust a guy like that? That's it's not very becoming. How's that going to work in the locker room? And what was his agent's role? How active was he in guiding things, in counseling his client, telling him he should do this or he should do that? Or was he completely a subordinate doing what he was told? That's a big question. And here are the biggest ones. Keith Carter, the athletic director at Ole Miss, I gave him so much credit for how he handled the Lane Kiffin fiasco. I said it was a seminal moment for Ole Miss athletics that he showed who was running the program, who was in charge. He wasn't going to allow himself be bullied by Lane Kiffin or extorted or however you want to frame it. And he stood his ground, and I felt the program was better for it. What does he do now? If indeed they do have proof, and I have no reason to doubt that Clemson has proof that Pete Golding and Ole Miss blatantly tampered with Luke Ferrelli, how does he address this? This is his guy. He made this hire, Pete Golding. This was the darling hire. This was the feel-good story that was painted for the college football playoff. How does Keith Carter sanction this? He's got to do something. He's got to do something. Otherwise, everything that he got, all the juice that he collected, not the dog, energy, power, that he collected from the Lane Kiffin fiasco is watered down. He's got to stand up. He's got to do something. I mean, I almost think that Pete Golding's goose could be cooked. Maybe I'm reacting harshly. I don't know. Dabo said he didn't want to get anybody fired, but this would be of Pete Golding's own doing. I don't know. What is Jim Phillips going to do? Have to think that he's going to defend Clemson. Have to think that Greg Sankey at the SEC gets involved next. If those guys definitely get involved and there's documentation, I don't see Pete Golding keeping that job. I don't. Unless, I mean, the only way he could do that would be extreme penalties, like no salary and having to go to all these different ethics courses and classes. And I'm sure he's not alone. I mean, obviously there were other people involved, other agents at Ole Miss, but it's just so extraordinary that a head coach would be involved. Just a lot to unpack now. And it's far from over. This thing's going to continue. It's going to continue. So we're going to monitor that. Remember, a lot of basketball games have been rescheduled, times adjusted for this storm. This storm's going to be rough. So wherever you are, hunker down and be safe. I want to thank Chapel Fowler of the state newspaper for stopping by. And remember, like, follow, subscribe, whatever you do with podcast, do it for this one. And you can hit me up directly on Twitter, X, at Scott H Sports. Comments, complaints, suggestions, whatever. Let me know what you want to discuss on the show. If you have a guest you want me to bring on, I'll try to facilitate it. But let me know what's on your mind. But otherwise, hey, let's stay warm. And until next time.